Ever wondered how your favorite clothing brands actually work behind the scenes? How are clothes even designed and made? Make the Dot co-founders Emily Ho and Theron Moodley talk with designers behind the most well-known brands and design institutions to get to know the humans behind the garments. Tune in to go deep with topics covering hopes, dreams, creativity, and work nightmares.
Welcome to Makers of Fashion, where we unveil the stories of the humans behind your favorite clothing brands. I'm your host, Emily Ho, and joining me is my co-host, Theron Moodley.
Howdy.
This episode is brought to you by Make the Dot, a collaborative canvas designed specifically for fashion designers. Make the Dot helps you save 5 hours a week by streamlining your concept development process, giving you more time to be creative. Click the link in the description below to learn more. Now, let's get back to the show. Today, we have a very special guest whose name is no stranger in the online fashion design community and is a very dear friend of ours. Joining us is Mikelle Drew-Pellum. Hi. Mikelle has worked with brands such as Champion, Gap, and J. Crew. She's a well-respected professor at Fashion Institute of Technology. She also runs her own fashion education service, 383 Design Studio, helping both fashion designers and corporate fashion design teams to improve their productivity by using digital design tools. With 19,000 followers and over 1 million views on her YouTube, Mikelle shares her fashion expertise with a global audience. Mikelle, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Can you share with us what initially inspired you to start your fashion journey?
That's a very good question. I'm not completely sure, but I can say that when I was young, I loved Barbies. I loved making clothes for Barbies. Every year I got a new Barbie and I would make clothes or try to style her,
Oh, wait, you made the clothes.
Oh yeah, I'm saying make clothes, but I have a thing on my billboard at home that was the first outfit that I've ever made. It's a thing. It's like this amorphous something that has 2 legs and some kind of top, and it was just made out of whatever I could find. And I know now that my mom had a sewing machine, but I had no idea how to use it, so I was just hand stitching things together, and
as a kid. Oh my god, that's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, but if you saw what it was that I made, I don't know if you'd be that impressed.
Would you cut up fabric scraps from, or maybe even cut up pieces of clothing from your mom to turn into Barbie clothes?
I don't even know what it was. The thing that I have on my billboard is felt, or it was it might have been an old blanket, or
right.
Who knows? Right. It was probably something I wasn't even supposed to cut up.
Okay.
So I have no idea what it was. It was just whatever I could find. I was like, ooh, I can make something out of this. And I was just in there finding threads. It was a mess, but I think that's where it started.
Okay. Awesome. And then so you kind of start developing taste around clothing, especially it sounds like it's more making clothes because we both play Barbies. I definitely didn't play Barbies that way.
I was gonna say,
which explains a lot. But it's super interesting to hear. And then you also then in your academic journey you did degrees and but did you always know? Even in high school, you knew you want to be a designer?
Yeah, it was really interesting because, as you get older, you kind of go back and forth between what you want to do. And it was always fashion design and something else. So it was fashion design and journalism, fashion design and teaching, fashion design and a lawyer, so I was convinced that I was going to double major.
Yeah.
When I got to college, which I did not do. I had a couple of minors though, but by the time I got to school, I was kind of okay, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go for fashion design.
Okay.
I minored in journalism, which is what I like to write now. But
nice.
It was fashion design. I was like, I'm going for it.
Interesting. And at that point in your degree, what wasn't that curriculum? Is that any different from the current curriculum that you're teaching today?
It's very similar, which is probably not the best thing because, I mean, this was like in the 90s, you know? Probably what's different is that there is more digital introduced, whereas it was kind of like an elective for us. And, you know, like I took to it because I thought it was cool. But like if you didn't want to take a digital class, you didn't have to. Now it's required, as it should be.
Right.
But yeah, a lot of it's the same types of things like, textile science, and you learn how to make patterns, and you learn how to drape, you learn how to sew. If you don't know how to sew. You have like costume history, all the things. I will say one of the classes that I teach now, and I don't know if this is universal. I know that there are some other schools that are trying to introduce this more, but one of the classes that I really like to teach is a PLM class, which is more like systems overview and just understanding like how you operate as a designer within the whole world of creating a garment or a product. And we did not have anything like that. So like, at least now the students who are coming out of school that take a class similar to that, they have a better understanding of what you're actually getting into, what is actually required to create a garment and bring it to market versus, when we came out of school, we were just like, we're going to design in Paris and, we're going to be shopping all day. And,
and I guess that's the difference between like learning about like, let's say like design best practice, color theories to kind of like being exposed to the building blocks, as you mentioned, like maybe in those system format where you learn about building blocks that contribute to making a real garment, especially at scale, because like then you still need to work efficiently like within teams. So I guess that is also part of what the school teaches.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, it does. It does. And I mean, there's a lot of students that I don't want to say they reject this, but they sort of feel like, well, some of this isn't relevant because I'm going to work in couture, and they have a point. Some of it isn't quite as relevant. But I will say that couture is about that much of the industry. And the likelihood, like if there's 10 students in your class, one, maybe two of them are going to go to a couture place. The rest of them might work in like high fashion, but it'll probably be like fashion ready to wear, especially if you're working in the US, you know. It's just what it is. If you want to work in the industry and you want to work, and not freelance, because freelance is a whole other thing. But, it's just numbers. There's a lot more ready to wear jobs than there are designer ready to wear jobs than there are couture jobs, So when they're like, well, I'm going to work in couture, I'm like, okay. And I'm not trying to discourage anybody because somebody is, you know, but 20, like almost 20 people in the class telling me I'm working in couture. Some of them are not, so.
Do you think the industry is kind of skewed towards couture, or like the perception of it, and that kind of feeds down into like kids, so everyone sees this as like, oh, it's a pinnacle, I'm going to work for one of the big fashion houses, when the reality is completely different?
Well, and that depends on what you're talking about, because are you talking about couture or are you talking about the luxury space? Because couture can be luxury, but luxury isn't necessarily couture. And they're very different. Well, not very different, but they're distinct.
Yeah.
And luxury is available to more people. It's still a smaller sect of people, but it's a bigger sect of people. Yeah. Like Louis Vuitton is couture.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Luxury.
Louis Vuitton is luxury.
I was agreeing with you there as well.
But it may not necessarily the Louis Vuitton that you're buying, that you're going into the store to get. That's not couture.
Yeah.
You gotta be somebody.
To
get the couture.
I'm with you.
And I think like usually like whenever I tell other people that, oh, I actually I work in the fashion industry, I make tools, and way back even before we started Make the Dot, we were in fashion supply chain. Whenever I tell my friends, everybody kind of immediately associate fashion with couture, with the runway, and I was like, oh, but what you're wearing on your body, that garment is part of the fashion industry. It's actually a huge part.
Yeah.
If anything, it's
what's keeping the lights on.
Yeah, it's what's keeping the lights on. It's what, like, majority of the people, when they say they work in fashion, that's the part that they work in.
Right.
And whenever I ask my friends, do you have any idea how clothes are made? And nobody did. And I wasn't surprised, because even me, before I entered the industry as a consumer, I also had no idea. Like, I just kind of, it's one of those things that you don't really think about until you come across it. Like, oh, how did anything appear on the shelves? In the store, like, how did everything just, like, you just walk in the store and everything's already
It's just
there. It's there. And then, like, and that's kind of like what I discover maybe my mid-20s, like, really, like, working in the industry, and that was the fascinating bit. And earlier, so you mentioned your journey in having the degree, and so from finishing your degree to getting to work with really iconic brands such as, like, J. Crew, the Gap, Champion, like, did you kind of immediately knew that was the path you were going to take, or did you try out the thing first and then eventually kind of landed in that path?
Yeah, not at all. The first thing was, when I was in school, I was making suits and loved it. Loved every minute of, like, the structure and sitting there and hand stitching a rolled collar and, like, the whole thing. I loved it. Loved it. But, you know, particularly at that time, when you get out of school, you are told you got to get a job, right? So the first people who who wanted me, because I applied for several jobs, but the first people who hired me, and I also liked them, because there were other people who said that they wanted me, but I was a little like, I don't know about this, was an activewear company.
Okay.
And I talk about, like, not really thinking about how things are made. Activewear at that time was not what activewear is now. You know, like, there's lounge and street, and especially after COVID, you know, lounge is like, you know, people live in that, right?
Yeah.
And then there was, like, Lululemon and then the yoga thing, you know, that wasn't a thing.
I think the early days it was more like sportswear, right?
Well, it was just for, like, gym rats and athletes.
Right.
That, you know, that was it. So I never really thought much about it, nor did I really feel like it was something that I could build a career around. You know, most of us, when we left school, we thought we were going to work in sportswear as opposed to sport wear, right? So when I get out here and I'm seeing what they're doing, and I'm like, all right, fine, do this. I'm thinking, you know, this will be a segue to something else. And I have stayed in that for pretty much my entire career. What I realized was it is very much more intense, and you really have to have a really good understanding of how the body works, because it's so close to the body. Like, you have to understand what the body looks like, how it works, how it functions, so that you're not placing seams in weirdo places, you know. And then when you're working with athletes, that's an even bigger thing, because you're creating clothing for an athlete to perform in. And so if you put a seam in a weird place, or you use a stitch that's, like, itchy, or, you know, is chafing, or, you know, so you have to think about that. So you're not only thinking about, okay, I need to make a beautiful garment, but it also needs to function. And that really appealed to me. And I think I was always a very cerebral person just in general. So now that I'm designing, but also, like, thinking more about it, that was like, okay, this is cool, you know? So that I think that was part of the reason why it kept me in activewear design. And then as I progressed, I moved into product development. And then eventually, I had started dabbling in like digital tools and whatnot very early on, because we started in Illustrator. But I went from that to a product developer to like project management. And then now I'm in product. I can't remember what that was. But, it's more, and then teaching, And this is by far not the path that I thought it would be at all. Like if you had said, 20 years ago, you're going to be teaching at FIT, even 10 years ago, because I've been teaching at FIT for like 8 years. And the 2 years prior to that, I was constantly trying to get in, and I was like applying for every position, got rejected every time. Well, not even rejected, like I just ghosted. Like nobody called me. And eventually I was just like, never mind. Like this is just stupid, And then one day I just woke up and they were like, hey, do you want to come there for an interview? I was like, and it was so random. It was like I woke up on a Sunday morning and I had this email in my inbox, and I was like, yes, yes, I want to come in. So yeah, just very, very unexpected.
Yeah, and I think like starting when you're talking about the like activewear being, I imagine how that's different from your initial like suits idea. Your suits
very different. Very
both are
different.
challenging in construction in its own way. Like when it comes to fit.
Yeah.
But I imagine like must have been a very interesting journey. Like as a designer.
Just in general, like the first thing is the fabric. When you're in suits, you're pretty much staying in wovens, and most of us, while we're in school, we don't even really like focus. Like we don't even pick up a knit, let alone one with spandex. Like maybe you might get a jersey or something for like a pocket lining. But to then go into something where it's a jersey with spandex, I was like mind blown. I was like, what do we do with this? How do I even sew this? I can't even sew it on my real machine. They're like, well, you get a Merrill machine. What the heck is a Merrill? Like, so it was a total like swapping brains and really just like relearning how to construct things and understanding of fabric and how the fabric works and how to sew things. Like it was a total re-education.
Right. Very interesting.
Or new education, because I'd never even learned about it.
Right, in the first place. And were there specific pieces that you remember even till today, like that worked on that, I don't know, like maybe a special memory attached to the team that you worked with, or could have been like something that you personally really like? Any products like that?
I don't completely remember the actual product, but I do remember the first time that I saw some of my products like in Shape magazine, which I'm not even sure if Shape even exists anymore. But yeah, it was something that I designed, and I don't even know who told me to go look in Shape magazine, and I opened it up and I was like, oh my God, that's my yeah, like it was such a big deal.
Yeah, it's been a surreal moment.
It really was. It was really cool. And then even like when you see your stuff in like the circular for the store, like that's a big deal, because it's on a model. And, it might not be like Vogue, but it's on a model, and somebody's posing in it. So those were always really fun to see.
Okay, so that was like a sort of like high moment. And like, what about like the flip side? Because fashion obviously is super high pressure industry. Like we've heard from so many different people, everyone's talking about how timeline is always really tight. Everyone's working overtime. Were there moments like that for you and your team as well?
Yes.
Where things maybe didn't go according to plan?
Yeah, there was one place that shall remain nameless that I worked, that it was awful. It was like the worst place I'd ever worked at. And I knew it was going to be that. I was only there for like 9 months and then I quit. Okay. And I was just like, I can't do this anymore. But I kind of knew that the first week that I was there, because I like usually your first week, it's, you're getting acquainted. People are saying, you're not really doing that much, right?
Yeah.
And even when they're busy, they don't want to scare you away right away.
Yeah, you usually get onboarded kind of gradually. Yeah.
That first week, I was there late every single night to the point I had to take a car home every day. And by Friday, I was just like, I've made a huge mistake. I was like, I need to just give them back their money because like they had, and I guess, sometimes you think to yourself, okay, everything is like going according to plan, like your career is progressing, blah, blah, blah. But sometimes, it's like everything is just too easy. Like I had asked for this ridiculous amount of money. They were like, sure. I was like, okay. I was like, should I ask for more?
They're really, really good or really, really bad.
Right. Like, I was like, okay, so I'm going to need this day off. Okay. All right. So then when I got there, I was like, oh, this is why they say yes, because this place is horrible.
When you say horrible, is it in terms of like how they manage everything, or is it like crazy like calendar that was different from everyone? They were making a lot more stuff, or
that place was a little of everything. The managers, I don't think were very good at managing us or our time. Everything was always like, we need it now, we need it now, we need it now, we need it yesterday. Coming to you at like 4:30 and saying, here's a new project.
We need it tonight.
We need it by 6.
Or they'll say, well, you can work on it tomorrow, but we need it by 5:00 tomorrow. And it's like, okay, so basically you sat on this all day and now you're giving it to me and then you're telling me I'm going to have to stay here all night to finish it, because it wouldn't even be something that you could finish in a day. Like you would have had to stay there till we started, and for me, the biggest thing was, and for anybody who is watching this, I always tell people, even when you don't feel like you have as much experience as wherever you're going, make sure that you follow your gut. Because I don't know why, but everything in me before I said yes to that company was like, I don't think you should do this. But everybody around me was like, this is a great opportunity. It's a great company. It's more money. Oh my God, they're paying you how much? Blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, yeah, but like I had met with the people, but the people who interviewed me, one particular person who actually was the reason that I left. It was the one place that I got fired. And I was like, haha, I already quit, so whatever. Like, but like she was the person who was like, you have to leave. And I remember meeting her and thinking, I don't like this woman, And I left the interview and I was just like, I don't think I should take this job. But then I was, you start talking yourself into, so I was like, well, I'm not going to really have to work with her every day. But,
let's try first. Maybe it's not as bad.
Right. Yeah. Oh, it sucked. It was horrible. It was off the worst job. I'm convinced that when I get to whatever time I take my last breath, I am convinced that it would have been 2 years later because that job took years off my life. Like, I'm just like, the last breath, I'm just like, I got 2 more.
No, I hear you. Because, like, I think I've definitely been at, like, toxic companies before as well. Usually the larger they are, the more toxic. Because it's, like, hard. It's, like, it gets harder to manage, right? Especially, like, which is why, like, when I first came into the fashion industry, I was like, I'm not that surprised because I also worked at several different corporates. And then I think my own philosophy is always like, when it comes to career and job, it's like you win in a place or you learn. Win could be like money, could be like position, could be like status, could be a lot of things like that different people value. But sometimes, like, obviously, like, if you get both at a job, like, good for you. But typically, yeah, you're not gonna get both. You're gonna get one or the other.
Yeah.
And early in my career, I was just kind of like always like pressing it down whenever like things weren't great. I was just like, but I'm learning. And up to a point when, at some point, was like, I've learned everything I could learn, and I don't feel great. I'm not winning. Like, I'm out. But I do think, yeah, you're right. I think sometimes listening to your gut is right, and that's kind of like what I wanted to ask you next as well. Like, because like when you work in a really big fashion company, like everybody needs to like collaborate. Because I think what I saw in terms of like collaboration when I work with different brands and clients, it was pretty shocking to me. Like it was the snapshot that I got like pre-COVID in like 2018, 19, and I really saw how everyone, even though digital tools have been kind of around at that time, like obviously Illustrator is already out, like 3D tools were already out. But yeah, everyone was really just collaborating with tear sheets, and somebody had to like explain to me what tear sheets were. And I visited, I was like, no, but like invite me to your office. I want to see it with my own eyes. I was like, I don't believe you. And then they took me to this really, really nice like Broadway office in New York. And yeah, I saw how the entire line plan, line sheet, everything was on the wall. And I was wondering, yeah, this is like a multi-billion-dollar company, and like you have floors and floors of like
paper
and like, and yeah, like was it like that for the teams that you've worked with? Like
yeah. I mean, fortunately, when activewear was one of the first like areas to really embrace digital tools, probably because the product itself lends itself really well to that. You know, there's a lot of graphics, there's a lot of color, the silhouettes are not that crazy, you know, so you can really make decisions and really see what this is. You know, like a hoodie's a hoodie, you know, bra top, you know, they're simple, right? So we were always very much on the cusp of, you know, we're doing it digitally, but within that, there was still a lot of paper. And I was fortunate that a lot of the managers that I worked with were very much on board with, okay, you know, if we had an idea and said, hey, could we do this digitally? They were like, okay, let's try it, you know? But not everybody was. So it was like we would come in with like our presentation, you know, our thumb drive or whatever it was, and people would be coming out passing out decks, you know. But it's just, I have often said to people, I am amazed at how much business people do using the methodology that they do. Because I would, during the time that I was freelancing for like a good 5-6 years, going to different places. And so every time you walk in a new place, you know, you got to acclimate to what they're doing. And so it was interesting to see all of these different companies and their method of getting stuff done. And sometimes I would just be like, yeah, this is what we're doing. As long as y'all pay me, you know. But then it got to a point, which I think is also how I started becoming like the go-to person for certain things, because I would always be like, you know, we could do this more easily if we did it this way, you know, or you might want to try this. Let's streamline this a little bit more, you know. But even now, there are so many companies that are like, well, this is how we'll design it, you know? And I'm like, yeah, but do you have any idea how much money you're losing, you know, or how much time?
Yeah.
Like the designers could be going home at 6 o'clock, not 10.
That's what I was talking about. Because like whenever we talk to designers and everyone's like, well, because usually you work, let's say if it's New York City, you work like Manhattan, but everybody live kind of outside. Everyone's just like, yeah, like I work till like 9, and then and then I take the path home, and then like that's terrible.
Yeah,
I don't get to like feed my children. I don't get to feed my dog. Like it's just and it sounded so common to an extent where I was like, this can't be the way, surely. Like
Isn't it sad?
It's interesting. But how do you think COVID kind of has changed maybe like mindset or mentality? Like what, or even like during that time? What do you see teams were doing at that time?
I think that a lot of the teams that were sort of holding back and resisting going more digital, they were forced to because they didn't have a choice, and then they started using it and they were like, this is not that bad, and then once people realized that they could actually get more time back in their life, then they were like, oh yeah, this is what we're doing. So it was great in that sense because it made people realize just how much could be done. Could be done using these digital tools. When it was sort of thought, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We're going to use this subscription that we paid for months ago that nobody used because nobody wanted to get on it. Nobody wanted to learn it, but it's been sitting there available to us all this time, So, I personally, it's COVID, so there was all these other things, but in terms of what it did for fashion and better understanding of the digital tools, better understanding of how they can really be leveraged to be more efficient, be more productive, get time back in your life, get more time to design, because most of us as designers, we all feel like we never have enough time to design. Well, if you can get rid of some of this other stuff, get some of that off your plate or get it off your plate more quickly, then you can have more time to design, So people are learning that, they're understanding that. And now I've got so many more people that were just like, yeah, I want to learn Clo. I want to learn how to do, I want to learn how to use this, blah, 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 blah. I want to use it, make the dot, And I think it's great,
Why do you reckon there was that initial inertia and pushback? Because it seems like a home run, but...
Well, the problem with digital is that you lose the tactility.
Okay.
And for most designers, that's really what they love. They love touching fabric and, touching the garment and draping and even doing flat pattern. Like I have a student who, she's on Instagram all the time. I love her to death. And she does like her behind the scenes. And a lot of it is she's making patterns. She's making patterns by hand. And I'm thinking, just get you into like something,
Yeah.
But I think she really enjoys, with the ruler and cutting with the, And I remember years ago, training some designers, and afterwards I just kind of went around and talked to each of them, and this woman was just so upset. Like she was visibly just like really like she looked like she was ready to cry, and I was like, what is wrong? I can help you.
Yeah.
She's like, no, it's not that. She's like, the drawing by hand was like the one thing that I really still enjoyed about my job.
Right, okay.
And she's like, if we have to go to this, that just takes it away.
Yeah.
So it's those types of things. Like I've run into other designers who really felt like they were really just connected to pen and paper.
Okay.
And, going on to digital, you kind of lose a lot of that, right? Even with a Wacom and a stylus, So that's what you're kind of going against, or having to push against. That's probably the biggest resistance.
Okay, makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. And having watched your YouTube channel for a while, you share a lot of different tips and tricks with people who are either learning design or already professional fashion designer looking for more efficient ways to do things. What would be like the number one secret hack that you think every designer should know?
Secret hack?
Now, not so secret hack. So... Yeah. Sharing with the world.
In terms of digital tools.
Could be general.
Oh, open question.
Well, in general, most designers work in a bit of a silo, especially like independent designers. And so for a lot of them, they don't really recognize that there are a whole lot of other people that touch your product before it gets to the consumer. And so you are the visionary, you are the start of all of this, but then you have to kind of direct, or at least have this direction, communicate this direction in some kind of way to all the other people who have to touch the product to then eventually get it to the consumer. And so one of the things that I tell designers is that you are not just a creative person, but you are almost like the creative storyteller, the visionary, the instructor, shall we say, of, you know, because you're the one who has to tell everybody this is what I want. And so it's really important that you know what you want. And there are a lot of designers who don't know what they want. Like, they kind of think they know, but then when you ask them about the details of things, they're unsure. And so one of the things that I usually leave my students with is make sure that you understand and really know what it is that you want so that you can clearly communicate that to somebody else. And then in the end, once it goes through all these million hands, the finished product is what you want, you know, and not some, you know, hack of, well, versions of that happens because, you know, costing and whatever else. But at least you're happy with the finished product. So all the tools and all the resources are there unlike any other time in our lives. You know, they certainly weren't available when I graduated, you know. Trying to like start a brand or, you know, be an independent designer or freelance, like all of that stuff was just unheard of. And now a lot of my students, I get a lot more students who are coming into the class and saying, I want to start a brand. I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to, you know, do this. I want to work for this company and then do this on the side. I want to freelance, you know, and that just wasn't the conversation before. So yeah, I mean, whatever you need, whatever resources you need, whatever resources you want, you have access to it.
Yeah. And actually, speaking of digital tools, I also wanted to ask you more about the 383 Design Studio. Kind of like, what was the initial thinking behind it? What prompted you to start it?
So what prompted me to start it was first that company that shall remain nameless. Long story short, I was supposed to do something for my sister who was very sick at the time. And, you know, when people are sick, you want to do something for them, but you feel like you can't. So this was the one thing that she asked me to do. And I was like, okay, something I can do for my sister. And I totally forgot. And she called me up and I was at work and, I was just like, oh my God. Like when she asked me about it, she's like, is it coming in the mail? Because, you know, our thing is tomorrow. And I was like, oh my God. And like practically dropped the phone. And so I went home. It was like these little cheerleading skirts that she wanted me to sew. I was up all night the entire weekend. And like 3 a.m., I'm on my sewing machine and I'm talking to my girlfriend. And I had an epiphany. And I was just like, I'm quitting this job. This sucks. You know, so when I left, after a 2-week party, I started freelancing and decided, okay, you know, I'll freelance for a while. And as I was freelancing, I started getting people who were like asking about, hey, you know, how do I do this?
Do you do
How do I do
X?
that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then one of my previous interns actually had said to me, "You're really good at this." Had asked me to help tutor him. And he's like, you should really like, make this into something. He's like, I paid all this money for a class that was horrible. He's like, in 2 hours, you taught me all this other stuff, and I paid like $1,500 for the class. And I was like, oh, did you? I was like, who knew?
I see. Oh, okay. So then you saw an opportunity there.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
throughout all this time, so what do you think is the most rewarding part for you teaching? Because you teach in various different kind of like settings, both online, offline. But to me, I think it's all about like imparting your skills, your knowledge, your experience and expertise. So yeah.
There's a few things, but I think probably what is most rewarding is them sharing their ideas with me, because it feeds me. Like just being around other artistic people and hearing what their ideas are. And some of them are just like things that I've never heard of before in my life, and I'm just like, wow, you want to do that? Okay, let's do it, And so it's really inspiring to me. And just reminds me because, when you're working in the fashion industry or just working every day, you can forget because you're just working, you're just doing it, And so you can very quickly forget why you even got into this, what you loved about it, the artfulness of it, and so whether it's the students at FIT or my students through 383 Design Studio, when they talk about what they want to do and, what kind of businesses they're starting and, all those things are really, really inspiring to me. And it really feeds the artfulness of my own soul.
That's great.
It's a hell of a quote.
And on that note, I hope, like, for those of you who are watching, you stay true to the original reason of why you enter this industry. And despite all these kind of chaos and stories that we always hear, I think, like, keeping an open mind in terms of, like, the way you work, the methodologies, like, there are always ways to actually improve. And then hopefully, somewhere along the way, Theron and I will also help reduce all that like chaos and overtime. But yeah, thank you so much, Mikelle.
Thank you, Mikelle. Thank you very, very much.
Snippet of your really interesting career, and I hope all of you enjoyed listening to Mikelle's story as much as we did. Thanks for listening to Makers of Fashion. We'll see you on the next episode. We will be releasing new episodes every Thursday on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast.